Good afternoon. Thank you everyone for joining us today. My name is Roxanne Adler-Hickey, and I'm the Interim Director of the William & Mary Washington Center. On behalf of William & Mary, I am pleased to welcome you to the second webinar in a three-part series on leadership. As you may know, if you participated in the first, these webinars, which are generally focused on leading with compassion, are designed to offer you lessons, opportunities to reflect, as well as concrete tools that you can take away and use immediately. Whether you are a new emerging leader or a seasoned veteran with years of experience, we tend to offer you a new way to consider how you lead, focused on topics like courage, belonging, and today's topic on inclusivity. We hope you enjoy the chance to learn from alumni leaders and William & Mary faculty. I am once again honored to be here today with so many colleagues who partnered to make this happen. Thank you especially to Vice Provost Anne-Marie Stocks, who empowered us to innovate and approve this idea many months ago. Thank you to Michael Steelman, Director of Alumni Career Management and Professional Networks, who did a considerable amount of work outreach to our prestigious alumni, organized many of the logistics with whom this would not be possible. Finally, thank you to the team of the William & Mary Washington Center, my colleagues who've worked with me on everything to date. So many others offered counsel and advice along the way, and I'm grateful to all of you. It has truly been an exhilarating experience to collaborate this way in the William & Mary community, and we thank you again for joining us today, whether for the first or second time. As you may know, these webinars are a taste of a pilot course that we're likely to offer this spring. The course would be a more involved version of the type of conversation in which we're going to engage today, so please make sure that you share with us your thoughts. We'll have a brief poll at the end of our session, as well as a follow-up survey that you'll receive via email. Your feedback will directly help us shape what comes next in this offering. So please, as you go through, pay attention to what you're enjoying about this experience. And for the purposes of today's webinar, please type any of your questions into the Q&A feature, and our presenters will try to answer them in the final portion of our hour together if time allows. So as I mentioned, today's session is focused on inclusivity in leadership, and it features Inga Carboni. She is a professor in the Mason School of Business at William & Mary. Inga has been teaching about organizational behavior here since 2007, and is particularly focused on topics of leadership, diversity, inclusion, and many others. Inga is an incredible professor and a scholar with an amazing CV that includes a Fulbright grant. Partnering with Professor Carboni is alumnus Mike Petters, who earned his MBA at William & Mary in 1993 and currently serves as president and CEO of Huntington Ingalls Industries. Mike has a tremendous leadership experience and expertise and has been recognized for his commitment to quality education, skills development, and workforce development programs. Mike is here to discuss with you a topic that he feels leaders sometimes gloss over. Mike believes that it's important for all leaders to be fully committed and engaged with diversity and inclusion topics, and I know you'll appreciate learning from him today. So that is enough for me. Let me please introduce you to Mike Petters.
Thanks, Roxanne. It's great to be with you all today, and Inga, it's great to share the platform with you, and I look forward to the conversation. I think to just kind of throw it out as a place to start, because you could start in a lot of places. I think leaders in organizations today find themselves typically trying to balance, lots of stakeholders and constituencies, whether it's customers or shareholders or communities or suppliers. We talk a lot about those stakeholders. I have a particular bias in that. My observation, and certainly true for our company, is that the largest source of business value creation, and then thereby community creation, stakeholder value creation, really resides in our employees. And trying to find the ways to create more engagement in our employees is the way that we can most effectively unlock value. So, that's worthy of a long discussion in itself, but you quickly move from engagement into diversity, inclusion, and empowerment as principal strategies to create that kind of engagement. So that's where our energy is, and we put a lot of energy into that. and I'm sure we'll have a chance to talk about that. And with that, I'll turn it over to Inga.
Wow, well, thanks. It's a pleasure to be here again and interacting with you, Mike, especially around a topic that is so important and that I'm passionate about. I know that you're passionate about it as well. So the business value that's being created out of deep engagement, which goes, as you noted, with diversity and inclusion and empowerment, how do you support that in the workplace? Like, when you were sort of thinking to yourself, I want to build this as a cornerstone of how we're doing business around here, what did you do? How did you do it?
We went, we went through, first of all, we had to get hit upside the head with whatever we're doing is not working, or it's not working as well as it could be. And we probably, like most leaders, you kind of have a sense that there's something not quite right. But there was a moment where one of our most important processes in our company is our succession planning process. We call it the organizational leadership review process. It's something that I'm involved personally 2 levels down in the organization, and I expect leaders in the organization to be involved 2 levels down from them. And part of that process is the kind of classic, okay, who's ready to take this job? If the beer truck runs over somebody on a Friday night, who's going to show up Saturday to fill the spot? But part of that is, okay, who's ready now, and who's going to be ready in a couple of years, and who's going to be ready in 5 years or 10 years? And what do we need to be doing to get those folks ready if they're not ready yet? And that's really the more interesting part of the conversation, is you start to look at who has the potential, who has the capacity. What are the opportunities going to present themselves, and how are we going to make those assignments? And that becomes really, making those assignments becomes the real discussion that we have. And in the course of that, you can, like we all can now, we can slice and dice the data lots of different ways. And we were going through another one of these reviews several years ago, and we started looking at, kind of classically, part of what we did was we would look at what's the diversity of all of our candidates. And it was pretty clear that the diversity at this particular level, the organization, hadn't really changed. And as I started talking to the leader in that position, and we were talking about, well, why isn't that? I heard that leader telling me the same thing that I said when I had that job 15 years earlier. And, you kind of have that moment of, if we keep doing it the same way, we're going to keep getting the same results. And so that was sort of the moment when we've got to go and do something completely different. And we've got to turn this into a change, kind of a change management process that we're going to use. And when we go to do change, we want to change something in the organization. The first place we start is we get senior leadership commitment. And the way you do that is you create an event where everybody has a shared experience. We took our senior leadership team, the vice presidents in our company, about between 50 and 60 people. We went to Atlanta. We went through the King Center, and then we went through the Center for Human Rights. And we had a dinner where we talked with Ambassador Young, Andrew Young, and we had a conversation with Martin Luther King III. And we just talked about it was an exposure experience, just to immerse everybody into an experience that most of the leadership really, it wasn't that it really is just not an experience they'd had before. And so we created a common experience. And then out of that experience, it was, okay, let's go create activity. And so where we are today, that was several years ago, those leaders actually were so moved by that experience, they took their own teams back over time and started working through that. And it has become, actions speak louder than words. And so, you can say you do these things, and you can have nice talk about it, but if you don't actually act on it, you don't get anywhere. So the action of taking everybody to Atlanta and committing to that having our leadership teams take their teams down and in that experience, or finding other experience. There are many of these ways to do this. You don't have to do it the way we did it. But by creating that common experience for everybody to now, you have a platform where you can have a conversation and you can develop action plans that will address the issues that you want. The second thing that we did was we believe very strongly that leadership is a craft. You know, welding is a craft, accounting is a craft, but leadership is a craft too. And you have to study it, you have to practice it, you have to understand it, you have to see it as a profession. And part of that, and we pride ourselves on continuing to develop that craft of leadership. And part of that is that at the top of any part of the organization, you have to recognize that you set the tone for the culture of your organization. You know, and so we came behind that with a charge to all of the leaders in the organization. And we have about over 5,000 leaders of some kind in the organization. The charge to them was your job as a leader is to create a culture where the least empowered person in your organization is confidently contributing to your success. Those words were chosen very carefully. The confidently contributing matters a lot. The least empowered matters a lot. As a leader, you have to figure out who the least empowered is, and then you have to figure out how to get them to participate and contribute. Sometimes it may be because of race or gender. Sometimes it might be because of what neighborhood they live in or what church they go to. There's lots of reasons that people don't feel empowered. But when they come to feel empowered, when the leader understands that and figures out how to bring them into the team and make them a confident contributor to the team, then that's the full contact leadership that we're really looking for, and that leads to higher levels of engagement. And it's become the principal plan for us in terms of pushing on engagement. And we've, you know, I would say we've had some success. I would argue that I'm impatient about the pace. I'd like it to go faster, but I also think we're on the right path.
I love the steps that you took. You had a sort of a moment of awakening where you realized, well, things aren't the way that I want them to be. There needs to be some change. And I love the idea of taking people through a common experience so that they have these sort of very rich kind of understanding of the world's a little different than I might see it. Other people have had different experiences than I've had. And I'm not surprised that they decided to take their own teams through something similar as well. And I like that too. They're creating a culture where the least empowered is confidently contributing to your success. Because like you said, it involves relationship building, it involves participation, it involves understanding your team in a pretty insightful way. But I've got to imagine that these are really new behaviors for a place where you said up until recently, well, up until a couple of years ago, there hadn't been a lot of change. And so how do you help them, you know, move and from that energizing start to getting where you want them to continue to go? How do you help them do that?
Well, I think the first thing that leaders have to understand or have to accept the responsibility for is that leaders set the tone for their organization. The most important person for you to get information about what your company or your institution is doing is your boss. You know, it could be there's newspaper articles, CNN might be covering you guys. It could be any source of information. There's lots of sources, but the most important source is your supervisor, your boss. And if you are a supervisor, number one, you have to recognize that your people rely on you for information. Number two, you rely on your supervision for information. And so accepting this, part of the leadership gig is accepting this responsibility to set the tone. You cannot abdicate that responsibility and be effective as a leader. At least in our organization, you can't. That means you accept responsibility, you assign accountability, you delegate authority, and you do all of those things because you're doing it as part of a process where you're setting a tone for your team. Setting that tone is how you set the culture. And so what we'll do is, as we professionalize the leadership, we will give people examples. We'll give them resources for, hey, here's a way to jumpstart your team. Here's a set of questions that can jumpstart your team to better gel. Here's what, what happens in the other part of the organization. I think early on in my career, what I recognized is that we're a large enough organization where even if you're seeing the problem for the very first time, you're not the first one in the organization to see it. And so creating that network of leaders, the ability for folks to share their experiences, come together and say, hey, I got an issue here. Has anybody seen this? And I go back to what we talked about before. When you set that common behavior in place, and as setting the tone, you say, this is my expectation, this is what I'm looking for. What you find is that the collaboration starts to go up, because now if you and I both went through the King Center, we have that common experience. We have a reason to talk about this. It's not as intimidating for me to say, I'm having a real problem here because I don't understand this, or I can't make this work for me. Well, you and I went through that experience together. Can you, do you have an idea? And so that's really the professionalism of it, and the leaders themselves understanding and accepting the responsibility of setting the tone.
I think that's great to really and have accountability around that this is part of what leadership means here, that this is what you need to do. So one of the things that I must think that would have been hard for leaders. So if you're getting leaders who look a lot alike in a lot of ways, and you're saying to them, check with each other to figure out what to pay attention to and what to learn about, how do they understand some of the nuanced things that people who aren't already in positions of leadership, if we look, I don't know, whatever dimensions that you're looking at, how do they get that?
Well, I mean, first of all, you have lots of metrics, and you, as any business, you end up having to report those metrics out. And so you can track at a very basic fundamental level. You can just track the metrics about what kind of changes are happening. But you can do other things like create processes that will just, that will make this happen. For instance, we've in parts of the organization, we've created a process where if there's an opening at a certain level in the organization, there's going to be a diverse set of candidates for that opening. Now when you do succession plans, go back to how this is connected. When you start doing succession planning and you start looking at your diversity of candidates that are available and ready for positions in the next year, and you realize as a leader in your organization that you're kind of thin in that area, you got to go put some energy into creating more diversity just in the candidate pool. And so what that means is you got to go, whether it's job assignments, special task force, or however it is, but it requires the leaders to step in and say, this is important enough for us to give these experiences, create these experiences. It's a long-term strategic process. We need to create these short-term experiences that are going to give us value there. Because if the argument that I'm going to have an opening in this area and I don't have any diverse candidates, that's a tough argument, right? That's a tough place to be. That means you weren't really looking ahead. That's the way I look at it, and that's the way I measure that. Is if you're in a place where you don't have a diverse candidate available, as an organization, you are not looking ahead, and that's a failure. And so creating that visibility and that accountability is really important.
So one of the ways that you're helping sort of that leadership group become more diverse itself is to bring in people who represent historically underrepresented groups. So one of the fears sometimes in an organization that's dominated by a particular type of person, maybe it's white males, you know,
Right.
or something like that, is that they can't help but see the world through their lens, because that's the air they've always breathed and that's what they've swum in. How do you help them sort of on a daily basis pick up some things that might be non-intuitive for them?
Well, I think that we do lots of things with that, you know. But to be honest, as we began this journey and began walking down this road, I got some pretty good hate mail, as you can imagine, and the opportunities to receive mail, we've expanded the avenues for that, and so yeah, there's you certainly are making people uncomfortable, but in some ways, I think that's the job of the leader, is to make the organization constructively uncomfortable. You know, if you are comfortable doing what you're doing, you're probably not progressing fast enough as an organization, and you're getting left behind by companies that are, you know, highlighting constructive discomfort. So, to me, I think that there is a little bit of how much discomfort is there in your organization? How much are you stretching the organization to go do that? But, you know, Inga, the other part of this is that, and I see this as part of the national conversation, you know, around immigration and, you know, disadvantaged populations and things like that. Somehow we have allowed ourselves to believe it's a zero-sum game, that your success is going to come at my expense. Well, that's not been the history of this country, for instance. That's not our history. Our history is that your success and my success make 1 and 1 equal 3. And so there's room in our country for that sort of collaborative success, but there's room in our company for it too. And helping folks understand that it doesn't come at their expense, that actually is the way we're going to measure their success, is going to be how well they do this. You got to kind of, you know, you got to have some backbone, you got to have some thick skin, you got to be willing to take some arrows for it. But at the same time, you got to realize that if everybody in this particular part of the organization all came from William & Mary, William & Mary is a great institution, but I would say there's probably ideas not being thought of in that part of the company. And so we've got to think about how do we create a place where we get all the best ideas on the table so we can go create the most value for all of our stakeholders. And the more that our leadership team kind of gets that understanding, the more they understand how to empower people, and the more successful they are.
That must have been really challenging for your leaders, because I know anyone today who's thinking about having those kind of constructive discomfort or uncomfortable conversations, there's a huge fear, right? That you're going to say the wrong thing or do the wrong thing, and it's going to blow up and it's going to be awful. How do you help your organization create a culture where you can have those kinds of conversations and it doesn't end with either hate mail from a wide variety of sources?
Right. So for me, all I can do is relay my own experiences. And I think that at the end, this all comes down to trust, and how you generate and create trust as a leader in your team. You know, how are you going to do that? You're going to be there to support them. You're going to give them the tools that they need. You're going to, you know, the charge as a leader is to put your folks in positions where they can do their best work. Well, it turns classic authoritarian kind of leadership upside down, right? It basically, instead of saying, do what I say, it is, okay, let's figure out what the job is and who's going to be able to do which part of it. And you know, we kind of have this experience, whether it's, most of us have this experience, whether it's through sports teams or music or stage, or however you kind of had that sort of experience growing up. You were part of a team at some point, and you had a role on that team that nobody else had. And that was unique, and that was diverse, because you couldn't do what you did without the other folks on the team doing what they did. And the team wouldn't work without you, and it wouldn't work without them. And so continuing to focus on teams and continuing to focus on the unique roles and helping leaders to know how to go do that, what that does is the great teams have great trust in each other. Now, in particular, the issue you mentioned about, I'm just a little nervous about talking about this because I don't want to create alienation or anything like that. I think if you're really working on building an effective team, what happens in that team is there's a lot of trust starts to build up. And I'll tell you what's happened for me specifically is I've told my team, I said, listen, if I go out and I say something or I do something that doesn't match, I trust that you will come in my office and tell me. And so, and frankly, people ask me, what's it take to be on the senior team in our company? And I say, well, you got to be qualified in your craft. You got to be a good lawyer to be the general counsel, but you're not going to be the general counsel in this company unless I can trust that you're going to come in the company, in my office, and tell me that I'm all messed up. That's what I have to have around my circle. And that's what I'd like to say that our leadership team's looking for around their circles as well. In the particular conversations about race or gender, what I found is that people want to talk about it. And, if you start the conversation, say, with some humility to say, look, I don't really understand how this happened. Where did you come from? How did you get here? What did you overcome? What did you think when you saw that flag or that sign? You'll hear. And every time that I've had that conversation with somebody, it has turned into a learning experience for me. And we haven't come close to stepping on, breaking eggshells or anything like that. It creates an appreciation, I think, on the part of the person that I actually asked. And it creates another layer of trust so that the next time I'm standing in front of the room and I say something stupid, that person's going to be the one that's going to come up to me and say, Mike, we talked about this last week and I thought you had it right, but no, you missed it again. Let's go over this again. And I've had those conversations. And so, I think that my personal experience is if you're building trust and you're open to the conversation and you enter the conversation with some humility, then you're going to get, the return on that investment of time is exponential.
Yeah, and I love this idea of creating trust. In academia we call that psychological safety, right? Where people feel that they can share those sort of things with you, and that's always to me an indicator that I've created that. When somebody can tell me where I've made a mistake or I've said something inadvertently offensive or I've overstepped a boundary. When someone can do that, I realize I've created psychological safety, because otherwise they wouldn't tell me. They would just be angry or hurt and kind of go off. I have some more follow-up questions on this, but I see some questions coming in, and I think I want to put something to you. And so one of them has asked how you assess the changes of engagement at Huntington Ingalls Industries. How have you assessed some of these changes?
Well, so how do we assess them? I mean, first of all, we are tracking kind of the metrics at every level of the organization, in terms of not just positions being filled, but in terms of candidates and development opportunities being filled. So we have, we can run numbers, and we can run all kinds of numbers that will tell you quantifiably where that is. We also do the Gallup 12 question survey on engagement that they've been doing for a few decades now, which correlates and it ties the level of engagement in your company to your business results. They have Gallup's a great organization. They have I don't know what the right term is now. I'd say warehouses of data, but that's probably not the right term. But they have more data than you can shake a stick at. So, and they are very good not only at collecting the data, but also then engaging with your team, because they actually have a process where as a leader, you have a group, and there's planning. You do, what are my action plans for what we want to get done for this year? How are we going to do that? Who's going to do it? It's pretty prescriptive in that if you're a brand new leader and you have never done this before, it's a way for you to kind of get your feet wet. And so we find that to be very valuable. And we can find in our organization, we can see the leaders who get it because their engagement scores in their team are really high. And when you go back and look, you can realize that, you know what, we see all the things that leader is doing that are working, and we can then transmit that to the organization so the organization can learn from that experience. So there is a quantifiable part of it, but then there's a qualitative part of it too, which is just the you know, what are you seeing when you walk on the shop floor or you're in the office? What do you see, and how do you feel about this? How does this place of work feel to you when you walk through? We don't want to dismiss that. If you see a place that's got great numbers, but then you walk through it and it doesn't feel like it's right, trust that sense and try to peel it back and understand, you know, why is there separation in that? You know, typically, especially with the metrics that we use, though, typically the numbers and the feelings match up pretty well. But we're doing both quantifiable and qualitative.
And I'm continuing to check the teams, the questions coming in, and it's definitely stimulating some conversation here. And actually, I have two questions that I want you to address at the same time because they're coming from two different perspectives.
Okay.
One person is wondering, how can we really believe that, for instance, people of color are getting their voice into the conversation if they're not at the table, especially not at the levels that other people are at? How can we make sure that they're really able to sort of get their voice out to be heard, and that that those ideas are affecting the business? And at the same time, I'm getting questions from other people who are saying, well, if you're prioritizing hiring people based on diversity, isn't that kind of like reverse racism? Because now you're trying to put people into these positions that maybe they're not going to be entirely qualified for.
Yeah, and that's we get both of those, and those are both, I'd say, they are legitimate concerns that you have to navigate through from a leadership standpoint. But our experience has been that we actually are pretty good at filling positions. Diversity means everything, right? It's not just about race and gender. Like I said, I knew of a real estate company where every member that worked there graduated from Auburn. Mm-hmm. And what that meant was that if you didn't graduate from Auburn, you didn't apply for a job there. Well, how many good people would have fit into that organization but didn't because they were turned off by that? So, you know, you have to navigate your way through these things in a thoughtful way. The second question, Inga, about isn't this kind of reverse discrimination? My view is that it's not a zero-sum game. That question comes from the place of you're giving up a position, you're going to use a position that I would otherwise have been able to get. And my view is none of these positions are going to squeeze people out. If you think it's a zero-sum game, then we need to step back and think about how we're going to create more value in this company. Because the challenge for any company with all of its stakeholders is to grow its value. You can't do that in a zero-sum environment. So I know it makes people nervous to think about that, but I insist that it's not a zero-sum environment, and we have plenty of opportunity for folks of all races, creeds, and genders to be able to be developed and be better leaders at what they're doing. The question about being at the table is a tough one, and that's the one that's really what we're trying to address, is how do we get more people to the right tables. My own experience here in this company is we've actually gone outside the company to diversify particular levels of the organization. That works for a while, but if you're not creating the sustainable culture in your organization where you're building that organically, that will fade. you'll have someone that you really rely on that suddenly departs the company for another opportunity. And so you really, while you continue to do that, we've built a very diverse board. I've had varying levels of diversity on my staff since we went public over the last 9 years. But I fundamentally believe that the long-term solution for a company like ours that, we build programs that are going to last 50 years out there, the way to do that is you have to continue to build internally, and you have to build organically, and you have to build it basically from the bootstraps up. And so putting energy into that part of the organization is kind of what we're trying to do.
But you must have had that very hard moment. So when you had that awakening moment and you said, wow, this is not the company that we need to be because we're not diverse when we're looking at succession planning. So everyone you had prepared to come through was, maybe they're all white males. All right, so that's what you had. So in a sense, there must have been a feeling that it was a little bit of a zero-sum game if you were then, either pulling in diversity candidates from somewhere else, or you were fast tracking some. I mean, how did that go with the company? That couldn't have been an easy transition.
Well, and it's still underway, but I think the challenge is that a lot of times the question and the perspective kind of comes from the, I don't see diversity at the top of the company. So I think the question, paraphrasing, I don't see diversity at the top of the company. So how do I know that diversity is important? And how do I know that our ideas are going to be understood? And I think that's a very legitimate question. And I think that what people are watching for, kind of go back to, people listen with their eyes. They see what you do and they see how you act, and they put that into a box and say that's consistent or it's not consistent. Your actions don't match your words. We've created a very diverse board, for instance, and I'm very proud of that. As I said, we've had varying degrees of diversity on my staff because we've addressed that with external hires, and that's worked well. But then we've had some folks depart, and you have to kind of regroup on that. When you start doing let's get people ready when they're at the second level of supervision instead of the fifth level of supervision, it becomes pretty apparent in the organization that you've picked the right people or you haven't. If you take somebody at the second level of the organization and you throw them into the fifth level of the organization, I don't care who you are or what your background is, you're not going to be ready for that. And so that is a mistake that I've seen companies make, is the idea that you're going to fast track somebody. That is a bit of a challenge, because when you start doing that, that creates animosity in the organization, and you're setting up someone to fail. So we're not really trying to fast track anybody. We're just trying to make this an important component of our overall leadership development program, and make sure that leaders themselves recognize when their team doesn't have as many independent thinkers as they need to be able to do their best work, and go work on that.
Do you use supplementary programs to foster this? There's a question about a mentorship program or a sponsorship program where you're connecting people in that way.
We've done some of that. I've seen lots of formal mentoring programs, and they typically are more programmatic than valuable. What I've seen work really, really well has been the informal mentoring programs, where folks recognize that they're now in it kind of goes back to accepting the responsibility of being the leader and setting the tone. And so I'm happy to be a mentor to folks who grew up on orange farms in Florida, because that's where I grew up, and I can talk to them about that. And I think people that come from those different kinds of backgrounds can help mentor like that. But one of the other things that we have is a very robust program in the company is we have these employee resource groups where we actually allow, we have executive sponsorship of groups that will be focused on employees who have something in common. It may be race, it may be gender, it could be anything. And I think we have 20 or 25 of these groups around the company now. And what that does is it kind of gets you know, you come into the company, it's a big place, nobody, you're from a different place, and suddenly it puts you in a group of folks who you all kind of, at least you have that in common. And now the folks who've been here for a while can kind of help you navigate your way through something as simple as, where do I live? You know, especially for new employees, this is really, really important. Where do I live? How's the best way to get around? What businesses work? Which ones, you know, what restaurants are good? I mean, those sound mundane, but those are very important to folks early in their professional lives. And so creating these groups to bring folks in and sponsor that and help has been very helpful for us.
You know, something you said sparked a thought, you know, and I talked to a lot of chief diversity officers and chief human resource officers. And one of the things that they really struggle with their organization and their more senior leadership is this idea when we're going through the hiring process, we want to get people who we want to have at this organization that have the kind of values that we hold at this organization. So we prioritize cultural fit. And that seems to be in tension a lot of times with prioritizing diversity related goals, where it could be that more diverse candidates don't have that strong cultural fit. How do you help people balance those two things?
Well, I think, first of all, I don't know that we don't call out cultural fit as a employment criteria. Some of that goes with being a larger company. Maybe we don't have to do that and say, if you want to work for us, these are the rules that we have. These are the values that we have. You know, you just come on board. The other piece of it is that a lot of our employees will require a clearance. And so in order to have a clearance, you've got to kind of, there's already, when you take the population of the country that has a clearance, there's already an alignment of some set of values there to start with. So we don't really deal with that too much. I'd be afraid when you said that, my first reaction says, those are code words, and I don't know that I would really want to be doing that. I would be more interested in, you know, how are you going to help my team? How are you going to help my team? Consistent with our values, how are you going to help our team? And so we set the tone and we set the standards for those values. Yeah,
that is. I don't know if all other organizations have the same thing where there's a piece of the hiring process where you're trying to figure out who you're more comfortable with, who would sort of maybe work better in the organization. It sounds like you've got some pre-screening built in, which might in some ways make it a little bit simpler.
That might make it, yeah, it might help a little bit, yeah.
I hope you don't mind. I'd like to just get a little personal for a minute. You are certainly not the first CEO at your organization to have noticed that it was mostly populated by white men. What led you? I mean, is there something in your personal experience, your history, or what was it that made you realize, wait, I want to change this?
You know, I don't know that there was any single event. I can tell you that you know, I grew up in the South. Now, Florida was not the center of activity in the 60s like Alabama or Georgia or Mississippi. But I was 8 years old when Martin Luther King was assassinated. And I remembered that. I remembered when that happened. I didn't know much about Dr. King. And over time, I learned more about him and learned really what a tremendous spirit the man had and how he really thought his way through, and a lot of really tough issues. And what struck me the most about him was that he never really took the short answer. He was playing the long game from the very beginning, and that is, in a society today that your stakeholders are on quarterly cycles, and they want to know what you're going to say on the news tonight, to something that happened to you today. The ability to play the long game on a really tough issue like that was very strategic, and that really impressed me. And I've just been really, really super impressed with the way he thought his way through that, and then come to understand what a tragedy it was that we lost him. But I go back to the conversation, how this sort of hit me on the side of the head with a hammer. I'm sitting in the review with this leader who's telling me the same thing that I said 15 years earlier, and nothing's really changed. And that's on a Wednesday or a Thursday. And that weekend, my wife and I went down to Atlanta to visit our daughter. And so it's Saturday, and she says, so what do you guys want to do today? And I said, wow, just hang out with you, whatever you got in mind. She says, why don't we go over to the King Center? And okay, never been there, went over there. And, it was an afternoon, it turned into a whole afternoon of revisiting some of my own personal journey and history. There were things in there that I remember when they happened, but I didn't remember much about it. And I didn't, and this was, in some ways, this was like putting on a whole new set of glasses for me. And when I came back to work the following Monday, I sat down with my leadership team and I said, we're all going to go do that. We all need to go do that because it's there, it's easy to do, and it will change the way people think. And we're going to create that common experience. So it was fortuitous and lucky and timing and all that sort of thing, but it was the way it worked out. So.
It's really amazing you were able to connect the personal. It sounds like there's some serendipity involved in there, but that you're putting it together and linking it to your personal experience and realizing you had the power in a lot of ways to shift what was going on in the organization. Can you tell us a little bit about, you sort of mentioned in passing that you got hate mail. Can you tell us a little bit about some of the struggles that you had when you were making this move?
Well, in some ways, this was one of those that once we started down the path, maybe it's a dangerous place for a leader to be, but I knew we were right. And I knew people wouldn't like it. I knew there would be folks who would be vocal about that, but I knew we were right. I knew this was we may not do the activity today correctly, but the path is the right path. There's no question in my mind. I have certainty and conviction that this is the right path. And so when you have that, and you have folks who wonder whether it's the right path or not, you're not dismissive of them. You want to try to understand, where are they coming from? How are they looking at this? And can I help them understand a different way to look at it? But at the same time, there's certainty around it. If you can't get your head around this as a leader in the organization, then we're at a place where you may not be sharing values of the organization. So, and when I meet with my leadership team, I tell them, I ask them point blank, are you guys up for this? This is not an easy road, but it's the road, and it's the one we're going on. So, and it's okay. Tell me now, if you're not up for this journey, if you're not up for putting in the time, let me know, because we'll find a friendly way to deal with that. But don't let me find out that you're not up for it without telling me. That's usually turns into an ethical issue or something that's really bad for the company. And so we try to head that off.
I can imagine it was a struggle for your senior leadership, who had been, at least content with the way things were, to sort of be facing something like that, making a change.
It was, but on the other side of it, let's go back to the most important person in the organization is your boss. And one of the things that people look at is, what is the boss putting their time into? You only have 168 hours a week. And so your team is watching how you spend every one of those hours. And so one of the most important things you can do as a leader is allocate time to your priorities. Because if you have a set of priorities, but you're not allocating time to it, your team is not going to believe they're your priorities. So we've done some very basic things, like I have a monthly staff meeting. At every single one of my monthly staff meetings, we have an hour on diversity, where one of the business units is talking about what they're doing in the organization, and they're sharing that with the rest of the company. Just allocating time for it. I have a vice president's meeting back in the old universe before all of this summer, but we would get everybody together. We would get in Atlanta. We'd be there for you know, a couple of days, and between a third and half of our time, we would talk about diversity. So if you're a leader in this organization and you're coming to the corporate meeting with the board and the CEO and the CEOs, the chiefs, all those folks, and you're going to be there for 2 days, and 1/3 of that time you're going to talk about diversity, it's kind of hard to walk away from that meeting and not know that this is a priority for the organization. So time allocation, you know, back to the craft of leadership, that's one of the tricks you have to let people know what's important to you.
You're signaling to them that this is how I'm spending my time, this is how I want you to spend your time, and you're showing them how you're prioritizing things.
Right.
I want to ask you a question, and sometimes this might be too granular or might be too vague, but one of the things that you know is really important when you bring diversity into the organization is that it's not just the people are there, but that their voices are shaping the business, that their voices are influencing the core of the business, which might upset, you know, can be difficult for some people. Do you have an example of when you recognized that those other voices were shaping the business in a way that, you know, is working for the business, but that you know would not have gone in that direction without those other voices speaking up?
Oh, you know, could probably too many to respond to. The first one that comes to mind, though, has been this summer with the you know, the murder and the civil unrest and the work in our streets and all of that. You know, I saw that. I was outraged like everybody else. But then organizationally, I had a trusted friend say to me, a lot of people in your organization are hurting because of this. Now, I didn't come up with that instinctively, you know, that wasn't my experience. But someone trusted me enough to, you know, to make that call and come see me and say, look, we got it. You can't just stay on the sideline. And so in the middle of the virus, we put together a podcast and a video where we went out and we talked about, you know, it was really messages to the employees that, you know, we know that this is an emotional event for you. Here's how we see it, which is we have empathy and sympathy, and here are resources available for you, and, you know, try to turn it into a constructive opportunity as well. That never would have happened, you know, if Mike had been able to just kind of think his way through it. I wasn't big enough to recognize that a large part of my organization was feeling this emotionally more than I was, and needed to hear something from us as a leadership team. So.
Wow. And what was the response to that from people in your organization?
You know, very positive. First of all, not everybody jumped out and did that. And in terms of looking around, you can see that not everybody did stuff like that. But secondly, then the feedback came, okay, Mike, that's great. Now what? Right? So the risk as a leader is that now what question is always right there behind the well thought out and highly scripted and planned activity. You got it all figured out and you go do it and you say, okay, that's done. And the next morning you get the now what from the folks that said, that was great, it was perfect, but now what? And so that began a lot of work in our office about, okay, where are we going from here? How do we put more pace in what we're doing? How do we make sure that the stuff that we're doing is collaboratively moving across the organization? How do we create more constructive discomfort on this and accelerate the work that we've been doing? And so that's what we're doing right now, is working our way through that.
Yeah, I think that's so important these days because so many companies jump on the bandwagon. They know what side they're supposed to stand on, and it's easy to say, you know, I stand with, you know, #MeToo, or I stand with Black Lives Matter. But sort of walking the walk and having people understand at a real level that you're walking the walk, I think is a very different challenge. And it sounds like you're getting the feedback that is how your employees are, what they're seeing.
Well, you know, if you're getting honest feedback, it should be mixed, right? And so, and we're getting lots of honest feedback. So, you know, yeah, again, I'm back to this. I have the certainty that this is the right path. It's the strategic right path for the organization. I believe that improving engagement in the organization is going to unlock value in the company. And I know that it's going to be constructively uncomfortable. So there's going to be people that are not comfortable, and we're going to have to make sure that we don't lose those people. But we also have to get them to understand what's the value of the path. And generally what we find, not always, but generally we find folks, when they start to understand that it's not a zero-sum game and that there's value in the path for the institution, and that if it's valuable for the institution, it'll be valuable for them as well. They come along, and sometimes they're not the convert leading at the front of the parade, but they are in the van. And so, over time that we've seen folks move from being on the street to getting into the parade to being in the front. We've seen that happen with lots of our leaders.
So I have so many more questions. This has been, I can't believe when I look down that the hour has flown by, because this has been so interesting to me, and you've had so many insights and you've taken so many interesting actions. I couldn't get to half the questions that were coming in either. But I want to thank you for this opportunity to have this conversation. I've learned something, so that's how I know it's been a good conversation. So thank you very much for sharing.
Well, Inga, it's great to see you again. It's great to be with you all. I was glad to do it. I hope that folks got a little bit out of it anyway. So build some trust. That's the name of the game.
Trust. Well, Inga and Mike, thank you from all of us participating today from the William & Mary community and beyond. Truly appreciate your candor, your honesty, the time that you've taken to prepare this discussion out of a very busy schedule that both of you have your day-to-days. But I know that your colleagues and teams are grateful to have you as leaders in your respective fields. And today we're really thrilled to have you join the William & Mary community. Just a few things, as Roxanne mentioned earlier in her introduction, that these webinars are a taste of a pilot course that we hope to offer this spring. So maybe those questions that Inga continues to have, we'll have to bring them to a course down the road. But the course would be a more involved version of this type of a conversation we experienced today, with engaging leaders in the field, with academics in their scholarly expertise. And so at this time, I want to invite all of you to fill out this quick survey. It's just 6 questions, so hopefully it won't take you very long, and that will help us understand the program today as well as future programs that we plan. Finally, we hope you'll all be able to join us again for our final version of this series of leadership webinars on October the 13th, same time, 12 noon Eastern time, for our last session featuring Jill Ellis and Deidre Connolly, discussing adversity in leadership. So if anybody has watched the new Netflix episode with Jill on the Playbook, the new documentary, that it's a great session, and I'm sure you'll also enjoy the 13th hour with her. So with that, I'm going to give you a few more seconds to fill out the poll and say thank you again to Mike and Inga. What a terrific hour. I know there's many more pieces to this discussion, but really appreciate diving into it and really giving us all some great insight and guidance and steps to implement in our own workplaces today. So thank you. And with that, have a great afternoon, everyone. Stay well.